I'm a little worried about a friend of mine. We both live in the same apartment building in a big city. City life is stressful, as many of you city dwellers may know. There's a saying that goes, you don't live in the city, you just survive in the city. It is a stressful way to live, but it's full of so much life and energy, I don't know if I'd trade it in for anything else. But I feel like my friend Todd is starting to get affected by the stress. He's telling me stories that really don't make much logical sense, and it's really starting to make me wonder if he's okay. So we walk different routes to work every day. I typically walk past all the food places like restaurants, bakeries, and delis to get to my office, a route that really isn't good for my waistline, I can tell you that. And Todd typically has to walk through the business district, which has a lot of clothing and fashion stores. Now, Todd is not a clothing and fashion kind of guy. He's very vanilla. He's worn the same gray wool coat, black scarf, and brown hat for years. Probably ever since I met him. So it struck me as odd when he started to tell me about this abandoned clothing store that he's been passing on his way to work recently. And even more specifically, the mannequin that's in the window. He said he's never noticed the store before, and he even swears that it wasn't there previously. He was walking to work one day, and bam, there it was. In my opinion though, Todd is the kind of guy that gets in his head a lot. Especially when he's doing something mundane like walking the same route over and over. So personally, I could totally see him not noticing a store that he passed, and then one day just noticing it. Anyway, he starts telling me about this store. It's clearly closed down. It looks like a wreck inside. The lights are always off, and it's dusty and locked with a large padlock. Typical abandoned store, by the way it sounds. The city is full of them. Nothing strange there. And then Todd starts describing this mannequin he saw in the window. He started to talk about how creepy it was and how unsettled it made him. He said it was the only thing in the whole abandoned store that seemed totally pristine. No dirt or dust or cobwebs or anything on it. And then his story got a little stranger. He said that one morning when he passed the mannequin, it was in a very specific pose. Its hands were on its hips, its feet were about shoulder width apart, and its head was tilted upwards towards the ceiling. But when he walked past the store again that evening on his way home from work, the mannequin's pose had changed. He said its hands were still on its hips and its feet were still shoulder width apart, but its head wasn't tilted upward anymore. Now its head was tilted straight, looking out the window at people walking by. I immediately asked him if he was getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, if stress from work was messing with him. I mean, I said it partially as a joke, but I was also semi-serious. I mean, there's no way he noticed the position of a mannequin's head. Chances are it was posed the exact same way all along and he just didn't remember it, and now his mind is playing tricks on him. I insisted that he take a day or two off from work just to relax and decompress, give himself a long weekend. And I didn't tell him this, but I actually decided I would check out this abandoned store he was talking about and see this mannequin for myself the next day. When I walked to the area Todd described, I did find the store. It was just like he told me. Dirty, closed up, and abandoned. And I saw the mannequin he talked about too. I mean, it wasn't any scarier or creepier than any other plastic, faceless mannequin. Maybe its pale white body did look a little out of place in the dark, abandoned store, but I didn't think it was anything to get worked up over. I was now convinced that Todd was just overstressed from work and needed to clear his head a little bit. I didn't speak to Todd again until the following Tuesday, after he took his much-needed 3-day weekend. So you can imagine my surprise when I finally saw Todd and the first thing he said to me was, "It moved." I immediately had an idea as to what he was talking about, and I had to stop myself from literally facepalming. Come on, man, with this mannequin thing again? Did you get enough rest this weekend? I really think you're imagining things. He insisted he wasn't. He insisted that when he passed the mannequin again today, it had shifted positions. More dramatically so this time. He said that when he passed it this evening, it was now posed as if it were mid-step and headed for the door of the store. He seemed legitimately frightened. At this point, I had no idea what was going on with my friend. I was worried he had legitimately lost his mind, and I even considered advising him to maybe seek the help of a doctor or therapist. But I know that those kind of statements could ruin a friendship, so I decided to keep my mouth shut. A few days later, he knocked on my apartment door to tell me another wild mannequin story. What was it doing now, a handstand? I said it somewhat sarcastically. He ignored my joke and he told me that it was now right at the store entrance. Right at the door. Its hand was posed against the glass of the door as if it was about to push it open and walk out. Todd looked a lot worse than when I'd last seen him. His hair was frazzled and there were bags and dark circles under his eyes, which were also red and bloodshot. For a moment, I seriously wondered if maybe he was on drugs or something. But before jumping to any more conclusions, I decided I would once again check it out for myself. So the next day I walked over to the store and, just as I had suspected, Todd was wrong. The mannequin wasn't by the door. It wasn't even in the store. Chances are some construction crew or cleanup crew came in to demo the rest of the store and took the mannequin with them or threw it away. Problem solved. I walked away from the store happy that I finally wouldn't have to hear any more stories about that stupid mannequin. My hopes were dashed, though, by a strange voicemail I woke up to the next morning. It registered as coming in past 3 in the morning, and it was from Todd. He sounded frantic, almost crazed. He screamed to me on the phone.
Hey man, I'm freaking out right now. It's outside my door, man. It's right outside my door. I heard knocking, pounding, and so I looked out the peephole and there it was. It's outside, man. It's outside and I don't know what to do.
There was a kind of bang or crash at the end of the message, and then a scream, and then it cut off. Immediately I went up to Todd's apartment and knocked on the door. When he didn't answer, I called him back and left a message saying I was worried about him and asking him to call me. I called some of the people we both knew from his office, and they said he didn't show up for work. I was getting a little worried. With his increasingly erratic behavior and my suspicion that he might be on drugs, I was now concerned that he might be passed out or worse inside his apartment. I know he kept a spare key under the mat, and I decided that now was the time to use it. When I entered his apartment, it was eerily quiet. Nothing really seemed out of place. His coat rack was empty, his television was off, the counters looked clean. I slowly moved through the apartment, listening for any noise. When I moved into his bedroom, I saw that his bed was empty and unmade. The closets and bathroom were empty. Everything else looked pretty much undisturbed. I was about to leave when I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. His phone was on the ground near his bed. Looking closer, I realized that his wallet was also on his side table. Who leaves their apartment without their phone or their wallet? Figuring now I did all I could do, it was time to call the police. This call led to another disappointment. The police were courteous enough, but the dispatcher explained to me that I wasn't family and Todd was a grown adult capable of making his own decisions who easily could have just left on his own accord, and they refused to open up a missing persons case or send any officers. So for the next few days, that was that. Friends and coworkers of Todd did what little they could to search for him, but there really wasn't any place to start or any indication of where he might have gone. Until one day. One day I was walking to the bank, and I realized that I was a block or two away from that abandoned store. And I don't know what came over me, but I decided to walk over there and check it out one more time. And when I got there, what I saw made my skin crawl. The mannequin was back in its original spot. Its hands were on its hips, its feet were shoulder-width apart, its head was tilted towards the ceiling. But now, instead of bare white plastic, it wore a gray wool coat, a black scarf, and a brown hat. I walked home in a daze. And that brings me to tonight. It's a little before 3 a.m., and I just heard a knock at my front door. Is the sound and Squidward sobbing sounded real. As if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes and the sound was coming through from the other side. As good as sound the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you'd have a hard time pinning it. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible.